probably most forthright encouragement would be that if you think it's going to be easy, you probably shouldn't get started, because anything that's easy isn't worth doing to begin with.
This is the Passive 25K podcast, a podcast built around the vision of creating wealth through passive income for ourselves and others. The idea of creating income while you sleep seems like a dream come true, but for most professionals, turning this into a reality is a different story. On this show, you will hear real people breaking passive income streams down to the basics, giving you the next steps to start your own passive income journey. If you're new to the show, my name is Kyle Reedstrom from Fargo, North Dakota, where I get to work with my team of agents and investors each day to complete our goal of $25,000 a month in passive income. Now, let's get right into our next conversation. This is the Passive 25K podcast with Kyle Reedstrom. We are, of course, home of Passive Income University. We help working professionals with one source of income start and complete their passive income journey. Quick story, we just had a conversation in our community about tax depreciation or avoiding taxes through depreciating your assets and accelerating that depreciation. So we dove in with someone that owned a rental property, wanted to do a cost segregation study to depreciate his asset quicker, and was able to really lower his income tax burden by doing that. So these are the types of convos we're having in our community. Find us at p25kg.com if you're looking for next steps. But today is episode 30. I'm excited to have my friend Mike Wagner here with the Storage Rebellion. We're going to be talking about buying your first storage facility. Mike, thanks for being on, man.
Oh, Kyle, thanks for having me, brother. I always love talking shop, and I always love hanging with you. So I'm excited to spend this time together.
Yeah, man. I really appreciate you taking the time. And I'm going to read a little bio to introduce you to our audience. Mike Wagner is a husband and father to 3 beautiful children. After walking down several wrong paths, Mike finally achieved his dream of financial freedom by investing in self-storage. He has been financially free for more than a decade now, and he and his family wake up every day to a calendar filled with get-tos instead of have-tos or shoulds. I love that, Mike. They travel 5 to 6 months, pour all their energy into projects that allow them to transcend success and find true fulfillment. For Mike, this means teaching others how to use ordinary garages to create an extraordinary life. Mike, I love that bio. It could not be in more alignment with what we do at Passive 25K Group and what our group, our crew does. And I just wanted to touch on, that bio does such a good job, but right before this, we were talking a little bit about this lifestyle piece, this financial freedom piece. And I'd love for you to give us an image of what your lifestyle looks like, since you've used business to create this lifestyle for you and your family.
Yeah, absolutely. And I am hyper passionate about creating by design the life that's going to best serve us, right? I think in this day and age, it's very easy to default into chasing the American dream, and there's nothing wrong with a house on an acre, a white picket fence, 2.5 kids, and a couple cars. Like, that's all good, and I think there's so much more available to all of us. And so my wife and I, for the longest time, probably we've been together for over 20 years now. And it wasn't long after we graduated college where we kind of hit that moment where we felt almost like we had been lied to, not maliciously. It's not some big conspiracy theory, but we did what everybody said we should do. Like, we went to school, got good grades, got some decent paying jobs. We spent less than we made, and things were comfortable, but I felt like something was off. Like, there's got to be more to it. And so that was the start of our journey, where we started to design the life that we wanted to live. And so these days that looks like lots of traveling. We live on the road between 5 and 6 months a year, depending. We've got a home base here, a house that I built myself several years ago up in Western New York. And we homeschool our kids. We believe very strongly that, yes, the public schools are great for a lot of things. And they're also not so great at other things. And so we chose, personal choice, to kind of grab the bull by the horns and just lead our kids toward the values and really the possibilities more than anything else that we know are available to them. And so that's what we do. We actually take off tomorrow. We're jumping in the camper and headed down. We're going to live for the month of the next 30 days or so. We're going to live down in Alabama, Mississippi, and Tennessee. And I wish I had a really cool reason on why those states. And I don't. It's just that we're trying to get our kids to all 50 states. And Alabama and Mississippi are two that we've never been to yet. And so we're gonna explore and find what those two particular states have to offer us.
Man, that I think it jumps off the page in people are hearing we travel 5 to 6 months. And it's just so unique that people have to stop and be like, wait, people don't even believe it until they hear it, Mike. You know, that's the thing, breaking this down and actually seeing someone that's doing this, living a life by design. You know, you put it on your goal sheet, but some people don't believe it until they like, oh, Mike and his family are doing this, you know? And what do you like, what are the benefits, man? Like, you must have an amazing relationship with your kids, your wife, your family. I mean, it's not all rainbows and butterflies, right? But like just the time coefficient that you guys have together.
Yeah, you know, you're absolutely right. It's not all rainbows and roses, especially when you go from a large suburban or country house down to a 300 square foot living quarters. There's 5 of us sharing this trailer, and it's a nice trailer, don't get me wrong, but sometimes it lacks a little bit of space. And you know, we decided to do this traveling thing because of the challenge we felt like it would create for us. Like, it forces us to learn how to really get along with our kids in a way that's maybe a little more intense than if we just stayed home all the time, right? Like,
Wow.
in many ways, it's an intentional pressure cooker, and it forces intimacy and closeness and problem solving and all of the normal parenting dynamics. It just kind of puts those into hyper focus for us, and for us, that's a welcome challenge, right? Are there times when we're like, "Ooh, we bit off more than we could chew. Let's go home and settle in for a month"? Absolutely. Like, it's not for the faint of heart, but we wouldn't have it any other way. We absolutely love it.
Yeah, man. Mike is a front row dad, brother. That's where we've met. Actually got an opportunity to sit next to each other at some of the events. And Mike, I recall you telling some stories about just that, being on the road, traveling, and problems arise, just like in the entrepreneurial journey, just like in business. But for kids and family members to use that as an opportunity to overcome, opportunity to find solutions, and just the victory behind that for younger spirits, kids, even for adults, man. It's still, when you solve a problem, you come up with a unique solution, you take that as such a gain in your life. So I just value that aspect of it, man.
Yeah, absolutely. We talk about a lot within our family. We talk about embracing the opportunity to improvise, which is really just a way of saying crap's going to go wrong, and we're going to figure it out. Like, we're going to figure it out one way or another. And listen, we've had some big mishaps along the road, and looking back, not only do they make great stories, but they truly are lifelong lessons for not only for our kids, but for Melanie and I as well.
Yeah, man. Well, hey, thanks for sharing that. I think that that's so important. And this is all because you made the decision to get into storage facility. We see the sign in the background, your crew, the storage rebels. I like to, I've seen some pictures and things. How did you, let's start from the beginning. Why storage? I think our audience has maybe seen this from afar, or they know someone that's done it. People that are curious about this, we'd love to hear why storage for you.
Yeah. And the short version of the story is that it wasn't always storage. I first went to school to be a physical therapist and actually became one. It took me about 6 years, $250,000 and 3 degrees. And that's kind of where I graduated, and I felt good about it, and I enjoyed treating patients. And that's where the disillusionment set in a little bit. And I realized, well, this is great, except that I don't get to control how much vacation time I have. If I work long enough, maybe I'll get an extra week or 2 down the road. And then when I do go on vacation, don't get to decide when I come home. And the bottom line is, I realized other people had more control over how I spent my time than I did. And so right out of school, I think I was about 24 years old. I just graduated. I bought my first house, and I did what a lot of folks do, which is, kind of the Burr method. I was just buying 1 to 4 family rental properties. And then I was playing the landlord game, and it worked well enough. I did, I guess, over the course of 3.5 years. I think I got up to like 14. I'm sorry, it was 12 or 13 houses, and I think 31 apartments was our peak. And like I said, it was working, except after those 4 years, I kind of redid the math. When you get started in real estate, you're like, well, if I own 100 houses and each one makes $100 a month, or 100 apartments, each one makes $100 a month, I'll be good. That'll be more than I'm making as a therapist, and I'll be happy. Well, 3 years in, I was only 31 apartments there, and I redid the math. It was like, ooh, I might need 150 of these things. And you extrapolate out how long that's going to take, and it's like, I can't sit through another 10 years of this. Like, I've got to make a change. And it really all came to a head when Melanie and I were down in Costa Rica, and like, it was a phenomenal vacation. We used to vacation a lot because well, to be blunt, we had to, in order to be sane, to be happy. Like, and I've since kind of adopted as a personal and family philosophy that we don't talk about vacations very much anymore. Sometimes I'll get in old habits and I will slip, but the reason I say that is vacations, the root word is vacate, which by definition means I have to vacate my ordinary everyday life in order to be at my happiest. Right. And so we were on this trip in Costa Rica. It was phenomenal. One of the best vacations we had ever taken. And about 2 days before it was over, there was this idyllic scene. We were on the beach. Like, it was just perfect. And then like a flash insight came to me that was like, you got to be back to work in 48 hours. And in that moment, I went from pure bliss to dread, like, instantly. And it was like nothing changed. The waves were still crashing around my ankles. My wife was still sunbathing down the beach. I was watching surfing lessons, drinking a beer. Like, circumstantially, nothing changed, except I was reminded of the reality that I didn't get to decide when I go back to work. Right. And that was kind of my epiphany, if you will. And I decided, listen, something's got to change. The houses aren't getting me where I want to go fast enough. And so I came home, and my wife refers to this as my crazy period, where I just went nuts. I was like, I explored every asset class, like all of them. I was like, there's got to be a faster way. And that's where I ultimately landed on storage. Ironically, it came down to mobile home parks and storage as the last two candidates. And storage won out for lots of reasons that I can share, but certainly not necessary to. That was back in 2011. And so I guess 12 plus years ago now. And we really haven't looked back since. The first deal went so well that we've just been replicating that time and again since. And of course, segued into teaching other people how to do the same.
Wow, man. That's a crazy moment for you to already be heading down a path and be like, I'm doing good. Good is the enemy of great, right? And then you said, I'm going to pivot. Like, that took a lot of courage, I got to believe, Mike. And I definitely want to key in on some of those main components of why you saw storage be the front runner.
Yeah. Well, first, allow me, if you will, to comment on like the courage part of it. And I'm not discounting the fact that, that did take a good bit of courage. And a lot of people are like, dude, Wagner, you're crazy. That's super risky. And I should share with your listeners that the day I bought my first storage facility, I also quit my job as a physical therapist. So when you take the lost income from my W-2 job and the $25,000 a year that my storage facility was losing the day I bought it, it was losing about $2,000 a month. It was a 6-figure pay cut. And people were like, dude, you went to school to become a doctor in physical therapy, and now you're taking a 6-figure pay cut to rent out some stinking garages. And they're like, you're nuts. Like, you've lost it. That's the riskiest thing I've ever heard. And I truly didn't see it that way. And I still to this day don't, because the way I looked at it, the lens through which I viewed it, and I think this is an important lesson for people to at least consider, is I knew my current circumstances were not making me happy. I was unsatisfied in my current job. And so staying there was basically guaranteed failure. That was guaranteed dissatisfaction. At least by shifting to the storage world, even though it was maybe a leap of faith in many regards, at least I knew I had a shot. And I knew I wasn't going to give up until I figured it out. I'll be honest with you and say, I had no idea what I was doing. I knew that there had to be more. And fortunately, my wife and I were in a situation where we had lived modestly enough where we could take this risk. Right. And so that's what we did. I do want to more directly answer your question about why we chose storage over some of the other things. And without getting too deep into the weeds, it comes down to the fundamentals, right? So self-storage, the income to expense ratio is less than any other real estate asset on the planet, right? So like if we just compare it to, let's say, multifamily, either 2 to 4 families or even single family on up to 40 unit and above rental buildings, for every dollar that comes in for your apartment, 50 cents of that on average is going to go out to operating expenses. Of course, then you pay your debt service and whatever's left is your profits. In the storage world, we typically run our operating income to expense ratio is usually about 30%. Depending on the deal and the market, it could be as low as 30, as high as 35. But even so, we've got basically 20 cents of every rental dollar to screw up with, and I'll still be better off than I was when I was a landlord, right? And so that gave me a lot of the courage that I needed, because I'm like, listen, if I can survive in rental houses, but storage is, inherently more profitable just from a dollars and cents standpoint, I've got to be able to make a go at this. And you look at that income to expense ratio, and what it comes down to are the physical differences in the properties, right? My properties are metal walls, metal roofs, metal doors, and I got one gate in front that, if I'm being honest, I get more calls per year than I want to about it not opening or closing quite right, but we hire that out and it's all good. But the bottom line is we have far less moving parts. There's no toilets to clog, very little HVAC, if any, no drywall to patch, no floors to get scraped. And maybe most importantly, perhaps more important than these physical differences that I'm describing, are the legal differences. Storage is not habitational real estate, meaning nobody lives in it. Which means that if you stop paying me, Kyle, as my customer, what I really mean is our automated software locks you out of our facility until you get caught up. As soon as you get caught up, the gate is smart enough, because it's connected to the internet, to say, hey, Kyle paid this bill, let him back in to get his stuff. That's a great position to be in, a whole lot better than the position I found myself in as a landlord, where someone would stop paying me rent, and then I would have to jump through 3, 6, 12 or more months worth of bureaucratic hoops just to get my property back, right? Like I had to go to court to remedy this situation where a tenant was stealing from me by not paying me rent, right? And then you see what happened in COVID, where even eviction became illegal for a period of time. You start to understand that storage is a lot more forgiving of an industry, and all of that boils down to, I think, the most important factor for me, the one that kind of was the deciding factor, was the fact that mortgages backed by self-storage assets default less often than any other mortgage-backed asset on the planet. Meaning literally, like if I had a mortgage on the house where I'm recording this right now, I would be statistically more likely to default on it, even though I depend on it for a roof over my wife and children, than I am to default on my storage facilities.
Man, and that has to speak volumes towards, like you say, when you're exploring the asset class in general, like, oh my gosh, this is a huge light bulb. This means these are really healthy investments, or the owners are just way better with their money, or, all of the above. Like this, these are much more of a fail-safe type of investment. So you're saying, okay, this seems like again, calculated risk instead of, hey, Mike's jumping off the crazy pool.
No, I was just going to say that's exactly right. And that's what ultimately gave me the courage to kind of step forward, not knowing much about storage at all. Like there weren't a lot of resources at the time out there. So I just made it up as I went. And we took our first facility. We bought it, just to give you a quick glimpse. It was a small facility, 10,000 square feet, about an hour from my house. We bought it for $330,000 and put about $20K into closing costs and a little bit of working capital. So it was a $350,000 project. Within 9 months, I had it appraised for $750K. Wow. And then we expanded multiple times over several years. In the end, I ended up selling that property for a grand total between cash flow and equity during our course of ownership for a $1.5 million profit. And of course, that begs the question, wow, Mike, you must be really smart. What'd you do? And dude, if I ever wanted that, like I wrestled the tiger story, like, oh, you should have seen it, it was incredible, this was the time. But the God's honest truth is, I answered the phone and treated people nicely, right? Like we found the right property. I'm not discounting that, right? And that's our strategy, is we look for neglected properties. That my loose criteria is we want value add properties that fit what I would describe as a low volume, high margin strategy. Meaning I don't want to have to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these things a year. I want to be able to do one every couple of years and have it fund my lifestyle. And so toward that end, our goal is always to double or triple the value of a property in 2 to 4 years. And the way we do that is we find properties that have glaring problems that are easy to fix, and then we simply fix those problems. So your stereotypical problems would be, mismanagement, neglect, the same thing as any other real estate: divorce, distress, dislocation. Any of the 4Ds are going to come into play for us. And then even more recently, a lot of what we're doing is just taking properties that don't look like they're in distress. They're full. They're relatively easy to run, but they're run by somebody who's 75 years old who wants to retire, and they don't know that it's a good idea to have your storage facility advertised on Google. And because they don't know that, they're charging 50% of the rent that they could be charging if they had a little more exposure. And so we simply create win-win situations where we help them retire. And of course, we buy it in a way that makes sense for us so that we can profit off the deal as well.
Very cool, man. That's I wanted to get into that first purchase story, Mike. So I'm glad you touched on that. And I think that's starting to creep into the audience's heads like, oh, well, how did he find this deal? How did you come about this? Or, the fact that it was cash flowing negatively must mean that it has a lot of vacancy. But again, you were seeing the potential. I love what you said about, the owners are ready to get out. The technology's old, to operate, how they're operating everything, treating people nicely, doing the things that are free really well. Right.
Yep.
And I want to get into the hows behind, how people can start walking down this path. And I want to get in just the first part, because after the break, I want to really dive into this. But if someone's made the decision saying, hey, I think this is a good idea. Like, I like what this Mike Wagner guy's saying. What is that first step? Like, when you found that, when you're like, hey, honey, I think we're going the storage facility route. Did you just start hitting the phones? Did you start making contacts? Like, what was your first step?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, obviously I did what I could to get smart on it. There's plenty of videos by myself and several other folks on the internet. You can find them on YouTube and just get smart on it, right? Free is always the best place to start, hands down. And it's not rocket science. The numbers are the same as any other rental real estate, right? Income minus expenses creates your net operating income. And then if you have debt service, you pay that. And these properties are valued based on the net operating income. So it's really straightforward. An hour or two on YouTube, and you can have a real handle of the general concepts. Obviously, there's an art to it, and there's nuances that you learn along the way. But once somebody has a handle on, like, okay, what does it mean to be a good storage deal? I wish I could say, do exactly like I did 11, 12 years ago, and you're likely to have success. The harsh reality is that the market's very different today than it was 12 years ago. So my first property, that property that ultimately I made over $1.5 million on, was a listed property. I bought it from, it was on, it was LoopNet is the site that it was on. And, three of my first 4 properties were all listed. And so back in the day, that was a viable way of finding deals. Since then, storage has gotten a little bit sexier, if you will, and a lot more people are into it. And so for the last several years, and even still today, although we're starting maybe to turn back toward a little bit of a buyer's market here over the next couple months with interest rates going up and that sort of thing. But the point being, direct to seller is where myself and my students are having our best bet. And so one of the things I teach people how to do is how to build a list using literally Google and a couple, and I'm happy to share it. I don't know that we need to get into that much detail, but literally in 5 minutes, I can teach somebody how to build a list. And I encourage them to build a list of 300 storage facilities within 2 hours of their house, or if they're already into investing on a larger scale and they're not scared of buying a property that's far away from home, which is totally doable, then they can expand their search. But generally speaking, it's easier to get smart locally, even if you don't end up buying locally, because at some point you're going to have to go kick these facilities and actually touch them and feel them and see how they work. And it's easier to do that if it's an hour drive than if it's a connecting flight through Atlanta. So that being said, that's usually where I start my students is let's build a list of 300 facilities that are going to at least be in the right geographic location for you based on your situation. And then we're going to start having conversations with sellers, either by mailing to them and enticing them to call us or calling them directly. And again, it doesn't matter which of those a student chooses. Both is really the best way to go.
Yeah.
And then that's the process by which you learn how to have conversations with sellers. You learn to identify their motivations, just like any other real estate, and you learn to sniff out the potential deals. And from there, it becomes we start making offers and seeing if we can't get one across the finish line.
Man, Mike, that's like you hit it on the head perfectly, because it was nice and simple. That was literally some really cool next steps that people can take. And in general, investing, rental property for single family homes, apartments, anything people are looking to do. I love the advice on kind of learning in your backyard, if you will, finding those areas within driving distance, that 2-hour radius. I think that's such a key piece of advice, because I know when I was first getting into real estate investing, the 2 fourplexes that I purchased that scared the crap out of me, if I wasn't able to get myself peace a couple nights just by doing a little drive by and being like, okay, the lights are still on, we're doing good. That was a really big piece of it for me, being able to touch it, kick the dirt, if you will. And I think that's great advice. I think it's such a digital and national and global world these days. It's like, hey, I could find something far away, but let's get our feet wet. Let's get the training wheels. That's awesome, man. I do want to take a break. We're going to take a little break, and we're going to come back. And I really want to dive into the title of this episode, kind of walking through some of those next steps of, hey, what does it look like to own my first storage facility? So we're going to take a break. We'll be back with Mike Wagner in a second. Hey, wanted to take a quick break from this week's episode, wondering if you've been asking yourself the question, how do I get started in this stuff? Or what are the next steps? Or where are people that are thinking the same way I am, or that are already doing this stuff, people that are on their passive income journey? Well, we were getting this question a lot, and that's why we were prompted to create a community of like-minded investors and entrepreneurs that we call Passive Income University. This is a place where we have a library of videos of things we've done and ways you can educate yourself on the passive income space. We've brought in experts and had conversations of people that have done this, are currently doing this, and have completed certain parts of this. We have gathered a collection of tools, information, spreadsheets, checklists for you to use in order to continue on your journey in the passive income space. We are going to learn and grow together in order for us to start, take next steps, and complete our passive income journey. If you're curious about taking your next steps, check out our website at p25kg.com, where you can apply to be a part of Passive Income University today. We are back on the Passive 25K podcast, episode 30. We are talking about buying your first storage facility with Mike Wagner. Mike, you were hitting on some amazing points of the initial steps to go down this path if you've decided that you're curious about this storage facility stuff. And you told us about your first investment. It was negative cash flow, and you brought that back for a total return, $1.5 million. I mean, we call that a home run grand slam, but you might not have known that at the time, right? But again, I love implementation. I love action from these podcasts, and I really want to give the audience those tools. So you gave us a little bit on maybe how to find those opportunities. Keep walking us down that path, even in the sense of who they should be leaning on. I know that you're in this world, but people definitely help with this process. And then any more of the tactics, man, you've just been hitting on this really well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm happy to share if people are interested. We've got a free community and a free 7-day blueprint that walks people through exactly what we're talking about here, and maybe a little more in depth, because we spend 30 minutes or so each day for 7 days really diving in. And it's entirely free. It's my way of making sure that I'm honoring my highest value of stewardship and giving more in value than we ever ask in compensation. So, and I have had several people tell me they've bought a facility having never paid us a dime, and that makes my heart boil over with happiness. So, happy to share those resources with your audience. As far as diving in specifically right now, let's say we've got a list and we want to call these people or make contact. The question becomes, well, how am I going to know if and when it's a deal, right? And of course, we've got to create your buy box as an individual. You have to figure out, all right, what are my goals? Am I a cash flow guy? Am I an equity guy? Am I open to both? It really depends on risk tolerances, resources, and objectives. And we have that conversation with folks within our community to help them figure it out and identify, all right, this is the type of facility I want. But I will suggest that the vast majority of people I'm able to convince that we're not cash flow guys versus equity guys, right? We're profit guys. And we understand that profit can come in both forms, because if you buy and create massive equity in a deal, well, you're going to create a bunch of cash flow along the way, right? Even if it's not cash flowing in the beginning. And we're very much looking toward the long game. I tell everybody who tries to get into storage, listen, if you need this to pay your bills in 6 months, you're doing the wrong thing, right? It's not going to happen. That said, once we've got properties we're looking at, we kind of know, okay, well, this is the goal we're trying to achieve. How do I know if it's a deal? And I'm going to break this down very simply. It sounds like an oversimplification, but it really is most of what folks need to know in order to identify a good deal. And what we do is we do a sniff test, right? So generally speaking, we're going to calculate in under 10 or 15 minutes the value of the property as it sits today. And that's simply current 12-month income minus current 12-month expenses. These are always not accurate, by the way, just especially if the expenses are coming from the seller or the broker. But we take it with a grain of salt. We do the math anyways. I already told your listeners that 33% is a rough rule of thumb. So if a property's bringing in 100K and they tell you there's 10K in expenses, it ain't right? There's going to be $30,000 to $35,000 in expenses for every $100,000 of revenue. But let's say that this property is generating $100,000, and let's pretend that the seller tells us, and it cost me about $30K to run it. Well, we know that 100 minus 30 is $70,000, and we're simply going to multiply that, or I should more accurately say, we're going to divide it by the cap rate. Right. And cap rate's a conversation that's probably a little deeper than we want to dive into today. I'm sure a lot of your listeners are well versed in that based on the quality of people you surround yourself with. But if anybody's not, it's a quick Google search away, and then running the numbers a couple of times, because it can be a little convoluted. Long story short, right now, a very good rule of thumb, average 8 cap. So using a cap rate of 8 on a storage facility, I used to say 10, but those days are gone. And a lot of facilities are trading for 6 and 7 cap. So we're just using 8. I want your audience to take this with a big rule of, or a grain of salt. This is just a rule of thumb that we're using as an academic exercise. But so if we take $70,000 in net operating income and divide it by 0.08, I wish I had a calculator on me, but I can tell you that's probably 880,000, 850 to 900K, give or take, right? Because dividing by 0.08 is the same as by 12 and a half. So 70 times 12 and a half should be 875, if I'm right. Could be wrong. Nobody check me on that. Long story, but that's a long-winded way of saying, hey, we're going to run the numbers. That's the as-is value. If you could buy it at that number, that would be a fair price based on today's market. Now, that's not the price I'm willing to pay, because as an investor who's interested in adding value to their properties and creating equity that I can then convert to higher amounts of cash flow, I'm going to want to buy at a discount of some sort. Now, I might need to discount from that number, let's say 875, and say, hey, I can offer you 600 for the property and hope it works. But the more likely scenario is I'm going to pay them at or near the fair price based on the existing income. I might even pay them a little extra if and only if the next formula that I'm going to share with you pans out, right? So the next formula is the same exact formula I just described, except it's a projected income and expense. So this is where you have to get smart and look around the market and say, hey, listen, this lady's 100% full. That should be a red flag that she's probably not charging enough, because any facility that's over 90% occupied isn't charging enough in rent. We're also going to look at the competition and see how full they are. If they're all full as well, but they're charging more, well, it stands to reason that we can raise the rents at this subject property and get the rents up. And I'm not exaggerating when I tell you, I had one of my very first students bought a deal in Pennsylvania, and he literally bought it, paid full retail for it. And the day he took over, he doubled the rates, and like 10 people moved out. They knew how much of a deal they were getting, and he was still lower than other people in town. And so he quite literally doubled the value of the property almost overnight. Now, it took him 6 months to find the property, and it took him, then he had to own it at these new rates for a period of 6 to 12 months before an appraiser would come in and say, yeah, this wasn't a fluke, right? But the point being, our job as investors is to identify the value add opportunities within the facilities. And if we can identify them, we know it's a deal. And then it just becomes a matter of working with the seller to see if we can't get them the number they're looking for. If we can't, how close can we get to it? And what terms, if they're willing to hold seller financing, might allow us to pay them more than we otherwise could if we we're going to bank, yada, yada, yada. I know that was really long-winded, Kyle. Hopefully it gives your listeners some insight into the game we're playing, though.
Mike, that was a tactical dream, man. That's exactly the stuff we like to talk about on this podcast. Literal implementable steps. And just it is simple. Like if people re-listen that, even if you have to, right? The cap rate is definitely something that you can get your head in the clouds on. But I love the part where you said you kind of got to wear your investor hat. People and myself, I get stuck at looking at a property and just looking at where it's at currently. When you put that investor hat on and you say, where can this be? As I'm turning the crank of being an investor, what if I'm increasing the income? What if the expenses are way out of whack and I can lower the expenses, right? Those are just two little toggles. Now, some of those, I'm sure, Mike, you run into deals where, man, I don't know if we can increase the income very much. Or these numbers, like, I really like this deal. I love this location. But we're just not able, the projected numbers aren't very different than the existing,
Right. That's exactly true. And those are the deals that sometimes you obviously just have to walk away from. One of the things I always encourage my students to do is I think we stumble on the best answers when we're asking the best questions. And so the first thing I teach many of my students is stop asking, is this a deal? And start asking, what would make it a deal? Because everything's a deal, right? What would make it a deal? Well, maybe if I could buy it for half their asking price. Okay, that's a hyperbolic example, and it actually happens. One of my students, Ken, he almost didn't offer on a facility because they were asking $725,000. He's like, dude, it's going to be worth 800, 900 when it's done. I'm not doing all that work for $100,000. And I said, fair enough, you shouldn't. What would make it a deal? And he said, well, if I could get it for half that. I said, well, give that a try. And he thought I was joking. He offered, I think he originally offered 300,000, and they didn't even respond. They responded by saying, we're not going to even counter that. And Ken likes to tell the story where he was taught in negotiating school that you never negotiate against yourself. And so he said, well, make me a counteroffer then, and let's see. And they said, no, we're not even going to do that. And he put his line in the sand and was like, forget it. I'll move on to the next one. And between his wife and me, we were able to convince him, listen, Ken, would you rather be right about this or would you rather be rich? And he said, well, if it comes down to that, I'd rather be rich. I said, then go make him one more offer. I said, how much are you willing to pay? He said, I'd pay 440 because I know it needs 60 grand in work. And if I was in it for 500K and we could get it to be worth 850 or 9, that would be a good deal to learn on. I said, cool, do it. He went back and offered 400. 40,000 less than he was willing to pay, and they accepted it on the spot.
Oh, man.
The coolest part of that story is he not only did he take it beyond what we projected, I think he ultimately sold it for 1.15 million, if I'm not mistaken. It was down in Hinesville, Georgia. And the woman who was working there when he bought it, she stayed on with him to help him through the transition, and has since stayed on with him. He sold that property, but he brought her with him. Now she and his wife run his entire management team, which is 6 facilities totaling over $10 million in value all around the country.
Wow, man.
None of it could have been possible if he didn't ask, what would make it a deal? And then if he didn't get over his pride of, oh, I don't negotiate against myself. And so I think there's a couple of golden nuggets in there for your listeners,
Yes,
and some limiting beliefs that hopefully they can circumnavigate a little better now.
And that's the skill we want to build as investors, as people that are going to have an eye for this stuff, is the muscle of, even if you're not going to make the play, the exercise of turning it into a deal. I always tell clients, if you had to buy this property, if you were forced to, what would you do to make it profitable? Because you're an ambitious aspiring investor. Well, I'd probably give it some curb appeal, and you kind of go down some routes that might be right, might be good ways to spend money, might not be, but it gets the muscle flexing, right? Mm-hmm. And then you can get prepared. And eventually you'll find that in real estate and investing, time helps. This is on your side. You don't have to be an expert. It's honestly the easy stuff that makes properties really, really hum a lot of times. So, man, I think there was some great golden nuggets there. Mike, I want to dive into the other side of this, man. We've talked a lot about the good, but I would be remiss if we didn't prepare our listeners that are all jacked about storage at this point. Mm-hmm. What are some of the drawbacks, man? And I don't know if you want to tell a story or if you want to give some advice in that category, but there's always two sides to this, right?
Yeah, there is 100%. And this is a risk I run, especially because I'm so excitable when it comes to storage. And literally it's changed my life in ways that I couldn't even begin to describe how grateful I am for them. And so, it can become easy to get carried away in the excitement. And in fact, we've actually seen that over the last 3 to 4 years with the increased demand for storage because of COVID, with the, when landlords could no longer evict, when people no longer went to their office space, when retail was shut down, is like, wow, there's some vulnerabilities in all of these assets that maybe we weren't aware of before the pandemic, right? And we saw institutionally all of that money come into storage. And what I believe has happened for the last 36 months is people have been paying too much for storage facilities. And they were doing it because they could. Rents were rising, occupancy was high, and debt costs were low, right? Interest rates were low and money was cheap. And so they could buy a property that wasn't actually a deal. They could pay full retail price, I would argue, an inflated retail price, and it would cash flow based on current circumstances. Well, over the last 6 to 12 months, we were reminded pretty starkly that current circumstances aren't necessarily the future circumstances. And so I guess the bottom line is the asset's great. And it doesn't mean you can just buy whatever you want for whatever price and expect to make money. Back in the 80s, you could buy a piece of cornfield and put up a storage facility and the customers would just show up. That's not the case anymore, right? There's more sophisticated competition. And there's a lot of money competing for deals. I like to think that we've created some strategies that insulate us from a lot of those risks, right? Buying at a discount clearly is the first and foremost among those, but also where we buy. Right? We buy in certain locations that might be more insulated to the highs and lows of a boom and bust cycle in the economy or in the storage industry specifically. But it's here's what I would say, that age old saying, right? It's not complicated. It's simple, but it doesn't mean it's easy, right? Mm-hmm. It takes work. It's not a get rich quick scheme. There are, and I could even name a lot of I've alluded to one earlier, right? Our gates. We have gates that are automated and they roll open and close to keep our customers' goods safe and also to make our management easy. If our customers aren't paying, that gate doesn't open until they pay us. And so it's a great collection tool for us. And it's also a pain in the neck if you own one of those where, like, if you live where I do or where Kyle does and it snows a lot, the snow gets in the way of the gate. And, there are these little, I'm going to call them annoyances. They're probably 10% of what I used to experience in the landlording world. And I probably I do make 10 times as much money as I did when I was a landlord. And so it's a trade I'd make every day, but it's not to say you won't have annoyances, right? We get break-ins now and then, depending on the markets we're in. You have to be careful to buy. You don't want to, I personally avoid flood zones. Or if I'm going to entertain a property in a flood zone, I'm going to make my purchase conditional on getting it removed from a flood zone, which is not as cumbersome as it may sound. It takes some time and it costs a little bit of money, but being in a flood zone is a big problem. And if you can eliminate that problem, you can create a lot of value in those kinds of facilities. So, I mean, those are just some examples. I could go on there. The bottom line is there's no such thing as free lunch. And my probably most forthright encouragement would be that if you think it's going to be easy, you probably shouldn't get started, because anything that's easy isn't worth doing to begin with.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome, man. And I want to segue that into, you have a similar vision that we had. We came across our mission statement, and it was to build wealth through passive income. And we realized something was missing, so we changed it to build wealth through passive income for ourselves and others, because we wanted to tell people about what we're up to. And you're in the same place. And so you're actively working with others, helping others have free tools. What's it look like, and how do you guys go about your business at Storage Rebellion?
Yeah. So the kind of origin story is, after I had my first really big round of success with that first facility that I mentioned, it was great. Like, hey, listen, if I have the choice between being rich and poor, I'm always going to choose rich. And anybody who tells you being rich makes all your problems go away and it instantly makes you feel like you're fulfilled and you're going to ask nothing more of life is lying or just sleeping and haven't woken up to the fact yet. I got to the point where I was like, listen, this is great, and I want to pay it forward, right? I'm successful, but I want to move toward fulfillment. And that means having an impact on other people, just as you alluded to. And so when we created this company, our tagline is, we use ordinary garages to create extraordinary lives. And I don't mind sharing with your audience, that's just the public facing tagline. And it's much more than a tagline for me. It's literally our mission statement. But what we really do is we use ordinary garages to create extraordinary lives so that we can use those extraordinary lives to spread awesomeness throughout the world. I believe very strongly in the idea of stewardship, which for those of your listeners that might not know is just this idea that none of the blessings in my life, all the awesomeness that I have, my, the money, the time, the freedom, the experiences and expertise, my family, like none of that's mine to do whatever I want with. It's been trusted to me, and it's my job to use that to do as much good in the world as possible with it. And so that's kind of where the Storage Rebellion was born out of. And we essentially provide people with the resources and tools, support, and community so they can pursue their best life through storage and feel like they're not doing it alone.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a huge piece of why we even sought out community, created community, is because we realized iron sharpens iron mentality, man. There is enough to go around. And I've learned that in this entrepreneurial world, this world in real estate, this world in being a dad, a husband, there is enough. We can all win at the same time. It's not a zero-sum game. And so once you learn that, to find a community, especially a niche community, man, you can accelerate the time coefficient in this game. So that's really neat, Mike.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you 100%. And, we believe very strongly that a rising tide lifts all ships, right? And one of the things I realized early on, and kind of what we do at the Storage Rebellion, is we basically meet people where they are on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And then we support them in their ascension up that. I won't get into the details, but how we do that, I think, is pertinent and maybe a good lesson for everybody. And this doesn't just apply to what we do in the storage world. It really applies to everything. And that is, I believe there's 3 key ingredients to success. I call it the 3 E's to storage success, or any success, really. The first is education, right? And to educate is to give knowledge. And that's part of what we do. That's why we give away our resources. That's why you can go on YouTube, and I don't hold any of my secrets back. It's just, there's the knowledge. Knowledge alone is not enough, because if it were, everybody would be a millionaire from doing something, because all the information that we have at our disposal is out there, right? So the other E that's also critically important is to encourage. So educate is to give knowledge, encourage is to give courage, right? So this is to inspire and support, cheerlead to some extent, and give hope, right? And so we do that as well. And I believe in that alone is great and also not enough, right? You can't no football team wins just because they got great cheerleaders, right? They've got to do the work too. And so what we do at the Storage Rebellion is we bring those two areas together, the education and the encouragement, and where those circles overlap, I believe is where we find empowerment. And empowerment is to give power, and power from a scientific stance is the only thing capable of achieving work. That's where the rubber meets the road. And so everybody needs differing ratios. Sometimes when you're started, you're like, listen, I don't need a cheerleader. I just need to know how to do it. Well, after you've been doing it for 6 months and haven't yet found success, that's when you might say, I don't need as much education today. I need a little more encouragement. And that's what we built our community to do, is to provide people with the right amount of each ingredient to maximize their chance of success.
Man, Mike, you got my engineering nerdery going with your power equation there, man. That was excellent, dude. Where can people find you? What's the best way to get it if people are curious about this, want to learn more? You mentioned some free tools.
Yeah, the best place to grab those free tools is storagerebels.com.
Okay.
And like I said, there's a 7-day blueprint there, and our free community, which is, it's got I like to describe it as the premier online encyclopedia of storage content. It's fully searchable. It's basically, and I hate to use this analogy because I'm so anti-Facebook these days, but it's basically a Facebook for people that only want to hear about storage when they plug into it, right? And we've got a search feature. So if you want to know, hey, what was Mike talking about those security gates? You can search security gates, and every video and or conversation that talked about that particular topic related to storage will pop up for you. And your access to that is completely free. And then, of course, there's other opportunities for people to invest further into their education, but it's never an obligation. The only other website I'll share is thestoragerebellion.com. If people are interested in, okay, that community is great and I love it, but I want to see what the company is all about and learn a little bit more about whether or not I can trust this long-haired guy, Mike, that might be a good place to go. It tells a little bit about our story, and there's some case studies available and that sort of thing.
Cool, man. Well, thanks for sharing. I got some quick hitters, just because you're a guy, you're a financial free man that's running a business. You're in this world. So we always like to pull out a few more nuggets. Quick hitter on any sort of app or piece of tech that you use that's improved your life.
Oh,
first one that comes.
Yeah. First one that comes to mind is Inside Tracker. It's an online health app where a phlebotomist comes to my house and draws my blood whenever I ask him to, and then they upload the results and tell me, hey, based on these results, these are the changes you should make with your exercise and nutrition.
Inside Tracker, man. I love that. Wealth is health as well, right? What's a recent read that you really liked?
Ooh, there's so many, dude. The Prodigal Son by Henry Nouwen is a good one, but I only know about that one because of Dr. Kelly Flanagan's The Inner Gathering. Which is being written and distributed in real time, chapter by chapter. Super cool.
Wow.
Experience to be involved with that.
Cool. That's okay. So that was Prodigal Son, right? Okay.
Yep.
And then just some quick specific advice for aspiring investors and people that are chasing this financial freedom goal.
My best advice is to, one, design the life you want in your heart, not the one that you think the world is imposing upon you, and surround yourself with people that are going to support you as you pursue your dreams.
Awesome, man. That's huge. Thanks, Mike. It's been awesome to have you on the show, Mike. It's been awesome to get to know you through Front Row Dads. Thanks for being a strong man, family man, husband, father to your kids, and obviously business and steward of your business as well, man. I just look up to you that way. So thanks so much, Mike.
Well, thank you, brother. I appreciate you all the same.
And I will end the episode by asking the audience, what is one action step you can take based on what you heard today? That's so important to us on this show. Do not wait. Action is key. And if you're currently on your passive income journey, reach out to us. Tell us your story. We love to hear them. We truly believe that we can accomplish financial freedom better together. This has been another episode of the Passive 25K podcast with Kyle Reedstrom. If you liked what you heard today, I encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel and like this video so we can get more of these conversations out to people that are curious about starting their passive income journey. And if you are thinking about starting your passive income journey, the next steps are to go to our website at p25kg.com and hit apply. This will get you into our application to join our community called Passive Income University, where you can learn everything there is to know about starting and completing your passive income journey. Thanks again for tuning in. I'll catch you next time for another conversation on the Passive 25K podcast.